It's good to see you again, everybody. Welcome to Wisconsin Icons. My name is Bob Dolan, and I'm, as always, very grateful to have you along. My title sponsor for Wisconsin Icons is Pasternak and Zergabel, award-winning personal injury attorneys. Their website is www.injurywisconsin.com. And my thanks also to Town Bank for their support and their interest. Their website is www.townbank.us. This episode's icon is Golda Meir. When I when I first moved to Milwaukee about a billion years ago, and people started to tell me, well, you know who's from Wisconsin, who's from Wisconsin, XYZ, and most of them I knew. But then somebody said, did you know Golda Meir is from Wisconsin? I said, are you talking about Golda Meir, Israeli prime minister, first female prime minister in the history of the Middle East? That Golda Meir had some time in Milwaukee, and sure enough, uh, she did. She had her foundational years here in Milwaukee. It's quite a remarkable journey. To tell us about her time in Milwaukee and obviously her time on the world stage. Dr. Dan Humschild. Dan, hello, and it's so good to have you as a guest on Wisconsin Icons. I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Bob. I'm really happy to be here.
Dan, I think I speak for most people in Wisconsin that we certainly know what became of Golda Meir, obviously, but a lot of us don't know where she came from or her foundational years. We just know her on the world stage, but her foundational years included a long time here in Milwaukee. So can you just please start with her life before Milwaukee and then how she came to Milwaukee? What were the circumstances?
Sure, yeah. So Golda Meir was born in what is present-day Ukraine, in Kiev, near Kiev, and eventually she and her family moved to Pinsk, which is just outside of, or in what's present-day Belarus. And at that time, her father was actually being contracted for work outside of what was called the Pale of Settlement. So, for the most part, in the early 20th century, Jewish people had to live in this very, very small, well, actually, it's a continent-size ghetto essentially that extends from the Baltic Sea all the way down through Ukraine, essentially. And certain areas were okay for Jews to live in and carry about with their regular everyday life, and other places were considered no-go zones. But for Golda's father, he was actually contracted to work outside the Pale Settlement, which provided them with avenues for life that other people didn't have. So they started in Kiev, but then eventually left due to a variety of different factors, including violence that was impinging on Jewish life in the area. Then they moved to Pinsk, which actually had also a very, very substantial Jewish community in present-day Belarus, and that again came with its own set of dangers. And so when she was 8 years old, they emigrated. They decided to move from Russia, as so many people did at that time. Around 2.5 million people actually moved from the Russian, 2.5 million Jews, that is, moved from the Russian lands between 1880s and 1920 or so. And Golda Meir is one of those individuals.
Just thinking, Dan, you just mentioned the time frame. Even logistically, to make that journey is quite remarkable. I mean, it's not, today we jump in an airplane, we're there in 12 hours, but to move a family from there to here is even in itself quite an achievement.
Absolutely. Yeah. And she took a boat from Antwerp to Quebec. So that's how she ended up emigrating between the European continent and North America. And then from Quebec, they transported through various channels to get to. They were headed for Milwaukee from the very beginning, but they ended up coming here by I believe it was by train and by boat, actually, from Quebec. So
Why was Milwaukee their ultimate destination? You would think that, they'd go to New York or somewhere out east.
yeah, they had come here because her father had come here prior to them. So she
Okay.
traveled with her siblings and mother, and then it was to meet up with her father, who had established a home for them, although tenuous as it was, here in Milwaukee.
So she arrives here, Dan, at about the age of 8. Is that correct?
Yep, that's right.
And she's here about a decade, approximately. So tell us
Yeah.
about those years from 8 to 18, her schooling. Did she have some sort of role in the community, a part-time job? Just walk us through those years.
Yeah, so her mother was a storekeeper, and she went to school at a local school. What's now actually called Golda Meir School, named in her honor, but was Fourth Street School at the time. And actually, interestingly, she was in this small group of people. Actually, she was kind of the leader of this small group of young women, young girls predominantly, who actually advocated for the support of their poor students, their poor peers who were living in the same kinds of squalorous conditions that she found herself in when she arrived here. The Haymarket district and that region of Milwaukee that's now known for the Pfizer Forum was at the time this epicenter of Jewish life, but predominantly of Russian Jewish life. And many of the students who were going to school with her at Fourth Street School couldn't afford books. And so she and some of her peers started this society called the Young Sisters Society, Young Sisters Association. And what they did was they essentially raised money through their own philanthropic work by donating the pennies that they could all scrape together and spare so that all their classmates could have books and school supplies for themselves. So even from a very young age, from the
Yeah.
time that she was 10 years old, not only was she kind of a known entity on Commissioner's Row, where her parents had this storefront, and so she would be around and about in that area. But even in her school, she was making an immediate impact by raising funds and being kind of this rallying epicenter of support for her peers, who, most of whom were she was not any better off than any of them for the most part, but
Yeah.
she had this philanthropic spirit from the very beginning.
In that section of what is now the Pfizer, in that section of town at that time of history, did they also fear for their safety here as they did from Belarus and others?
So many people emigrated to the United States in the hopes that what they would find here was a bit of a safe haven.
Yeah.
And for the most part, that was true. Although at the time that Golda was here, there was still a rampant anti-Semitism. The Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which is one of the most famous works of anti-Semitic false propaganda that was created ever, was published originally at the turn of the century, like 1903. And in 1910, 1912, these times when Golda Meir is working through the school system here in Milwaukee, these sorts of ideas, these sorts of conspiracy theories about Jews as wanting to take over the world and control everything with this international network of co-conspirators was circulating in the world. And in fact, kind of her predecessors, people like Lizzie Cantor, Aunt Lizzie, as we know, the person who created the Settlement Cookbook, were doing a lot of the work that she was doing in part to help the immigrants like Golda and Golda's family to lift themselves out of poverty because she knew that people who are living in poverty are in that time, and I think even today, were not assessed with sympathy or compassion, but were actually assessed as being wanting and actually being the like deserving of that poverty or the deserving of living in that squalor and were actually blamed for their condition. And when people are blamed for their condition, that often foments a certain amount of xenophobia or nationalism on the flip side. And in the case of people like Golda Meir and Lizzie Cantor, anti-Semitism. And so people at the time were concerned about anti-Semitism, but it wasn't similar to places like Pinsk and Kiev, where the
Mhm.
government was sponsoring pogroms against the Jewish people.
At this time of her life, Dan, does she believe that Milwaukee and Wisconsin is nothing more than a rest stop? Or does she know that, one day she's going to leave?
I don't, I, it's hard to say for me. I don't know if I can make that assessment, but I don't know that what they anticipate, what became of her could have been anticipated. I
Yeah.
know she was really introduced to Zionism and ideas surrounding the formation of the Jewish state in Israel, um, here in Milwaukee. It was through her sister and her sister's boyfriend and different people that she was hanging out with in her teen years. You know, this is after that initial philanthropic work. She starts to grow into a young woman at North Division High School. And during that time, she was becoming more introduced to ideas around Zionism and started to really become convinced that the Jewish state was a possibility and was in fact a necessity. And so it was in those teen years when she at one point ran away from Milwaukee for a little while to be with her sister and her sister's boyfriend, who her father saw as quite radical, but quite adamant and in support of the creation of the Jewish state, that she started to grow more and more invested in this sort of agenda. And so I think it was during those teen years that the idea that Milwaukee was maybe the the stopover to something bigger
Sure.
and greater that it formed. But I don't know that when she arrived that she was seeing it in that way, or that her
Sure.
family was seeing it in that
Sure.
way.
And the circumstances, Dan, of her eventually leaving and to the Middle East.
Yeah, so she emigrated to the Middle East when she got married in 19, 18 or 19, and then she and her husband emigrated there
So
in
she got
when she
married
was
here.
about
She
she
got
got
married.
married here in Milwaukee. Yeah, that's right. And then she emigrated with her husband uh, to Israel when she was about 21 years old, actually.
Okay.
And she went there with the same kind of adamance and fervor that her sister and brother were, and many people before her who were invested in the Zionist cause at the time.
At this time, so now she's in the Middle East. She's in her 20s. What's her personality like? I mean, is she quiet? Is she kind? Is she forceful? Is she, rebellious? I mean, what's the young Golda Meir like?
Yeah, I think rebellious is certainly one word that people have ascribed to her, partly because of the fact that she did, run away from home. So people from
Yeah,
from the Milwaukee side of things consider that a certain kind of rebellion. But I think she was very strong-willed. She had a lot of uh, investment in what she thought was right and what she knew was right, and so she went to Israel with the same kind of fervor that she went to Colorado, for example, when she had left.
uh-huh.
She brought a lot of skills of tenacity, I would say, to to her work in Israel. I mean, she very quickly established herself as a formidable player in Israeli politics. I would say, yeah, tenacious is probably the key word for somebody like Golda Meir. So I suppose tenacity comes with a certain amount of
Yeah,
rebellion, right? But it's a kind of rebellion that I think is admirable, one that acknowledges that what the situation that somebody's in is not the one that they want, and
absolutely.
that they are going to kind of systematically learn about and pursue and allocate all their resources toward accomplishing something new.
Absolutely. So,
That's
so
that's
she knows in her heart what is right and what is wrong, and she's going to do whatever she can to make the
Mhm.
right occur,
That's right.
and nobody's going to get in her way. You know what
No.
fascinates me, Dan, about this story is okay. Now the time period now is about 1940s, 50s, et cetera. When she starts to make her mark in the Middle
Mhm.
East, and she
Mhm.
starts to climb the ladder a little bit, and if you keep in mind the time period, how in the world does a woman in the Middle East climb the ladder all the way to prime minister of Israel? That to me is remarkable just because of the timing. How does it
Sure.
happen?
Yeah. Well, I think one of the things that's interesting about the story of the state of Israel is that it does have a space. There is a space there for voices of all sorts, right? There's a space there from the very beginning for the voices of women, right? There's a space there for voices from various places within the Jewish diaspora that are coming back to Israel to establish a state.
Mm-hmm.
And so from the very beginning, the state of Israel is thought of as this um, as a genuine, in some ways, melting pot of ideas, right, that are still connected by this through line of history and I suppose religious and cultural practice that despite its dispersion throughout the world over the course of thousands of years, there's still this connective tissue that everybody feels drawn to and that everybody's there for the same mission. And so whoever is able to participate in the creation of this project, right, in the fruition of this project is welcome, right? So for Golda, um, this sort of tenacious character that she had and this willingness that she had to connect people, to network with people very, very quickly, and also to use those skills to raise money,
Mhm.
is really what made her an invaluable resource to the nascent state. You know, this small grouping of people who wanted to build this state out of nothing needed a lot of resources, and so she was the kind of person who could convince people of her stance by virtue of her conviction, and she could convince them to support Israel militarily or financially or whatever it might be by virtue of the fact that she had done her homework and that she knew what she was talking about. And so she was at first a labor minister, so she was really focused on more in internal politics. Then she was a foreign minister before eventually becoming the prime minister. So she did kind of work her way through the official ranks of politics, but even from the very beginning, she was in the background, you know, rallying friends, rallying support, finding opportunities for more money and resources to flow into this new state. And you know, she was not alone in being a woman on a larger platform there, but she, of course, was the first female prime minister, of course, to climb all the way to the top of that ladder.
How badly did she want it, Dan? I mean, often it just kind of happens. I mean, you climb, you climb, you climb, and it's kind of a natural progression. Did she want this? I mean, was this just deep inside her heart, or did it just she just accepted it?
It feels to me more like an acceptance that she felt like it was the next logical step for her and that it was the next logical step for the country. But it didn't seem that she was, I would say, careerist in that
Yeah,
particular kind of way, where
yeah,
she
yeah.
wasn't aiming at some natural zenith for herself. She was simply taking the next logical step and doing what she could to help her country and her people. Which I think is the kind of leader that we all want, right? One who's a
Yeah,
little less invested in the
yeah,
title and
yeah,
a little more invested in the work. Right?
absolutely. Well said. She's prime minister for 5 years, I believe.
Hmm.
When you look back, what is her 5 years are best known for what? Her leadership is best known for what?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a leadership that comes with a bit of there's a lot of people who question her leadership, I think. But I'd say that one thing that she speaks about so eloquently in her later years, and even in her visit to Milwaukee when she returned as the acting prime minister, is that she certainly brought a level of tenacity to the role and to the people and to the country in forging an identity, I'd say, for the Jewish people. She was there at a very, very tumultuous time when Israel was starting to be looked to as a significant player on the global stage. And so she had to make some very tough decisions for which she is criticized now, even today by Jews and non-Jews alike. But I think what she showed is that she had the gumption and the insight to make declarations for the state of Israel for and then therefore for a broader, I guess, intention of the Jewish people to be uh, capable or able of self-governance, to do so on a stage and stick to her decisions in some ways. So I'd say for me, the legacy that I think about when I think about her is she's kind of this first real stamp on the global Western stage as we know it today, as being this kind of icon of leadership for Israel in a way that is profound and um, is I suppose particular and is very very uh, focused on unifying the Israeli people around some sort of identity. So she really helped, I think, shape Israeli identity in that like newish phase when they were still establishing themselves on the global stage.
You just mentioned, Dan, that she returned to Milwaukee as prime minister. Would she, in her life and her career, would she often speak of Milwaukee? Would she often, hey, when I was growing up, I did X, Y, and Z, or would she was she was there a tendency to hide the fact that for 10 years she lived in the United States? You know, what role did Milwaukee play in her life as she aged?
Yeah, she definitely didn't shy away from that part of her life. I think she saw that her life was so emblematic of many of the people who were fighting for the same thing that she was fighting for. She had witnessed so many of her friends and family members be, you know, uh, tormented, I suppose, by anti-Semitism
Sure.
in various places around the world, whether it be in, the Russian lands and the Pale of Settlement in Poland and Belarus, or in the United States. And so she was cognizant of this immigrant's journey that kind of led, all roads lead back to this place that she called home. And so I don't believe that she shied away from it. In fact, she spoke of it quite beautifully. She wrote in her autobiography about Milwaukee being this lovely place that she always really admired and found to be an attractive place to live. I think she said she she remembered the color of Milwaukee, which
Really?
is interesting.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, and I think it almost plays into our own stereotypes about like uh, early 20th century Russian lands as being this sort of drab and colorless gray zone that then this immigrant comes here uh, with the voice that she has eventually and just names Milwaukee as colorful, which I
yeah.
think many Milwaukeeans
Interesting word. Yeah.
will be
Right,
happy to hear, right? We don't
right, right,
often maybe think of ourselves in that
right.
way, but she saw it as this colorful, wonderful, vibrant city in this space where she could actually explore who she was.
Sure.
And I think many people have suggested, and I don't know that she would contest the fact that really her identity as an Israeli uh, emerged here in Milwaukee more
Hmm.
than anything else. And then, of course, it was honed when she finally was able to move there in 1921.
If I'm putting you on the spot with this one, feel free to tell me.
Sure.
But try to. How would she feel? How would she react today to the events in the Middle East?
That's a good question. I think I've actually encountered a number of people here at the museum that have been touring around saying, "Boy, I wish we had Golda
Really? Yeah,
back in
yeah, yeah,
back in Israel." You know, if people come into the museum, they can actually listen to her speaking to the crowds of people who gathered to see her when she came back to Milwaukee. And she has um, a tone of, I suppose, confidence and um, passion and enthusiasm for the requirement to defend oneself that is really quite remarkable and I think quite telling in today's moment, right? There's a lot of people right now who are advocating for different levels of defensiveness for the state of Israel, right? And when you hear Golda speak, this is in the 1960s, you
yeah,
hear her speak about the need to basically about how Israel could kind of take all comers and that people wanted to destroy Israel and they were far outnumbered. And she paints it as this very David and Goliath kind of situation, which in
yeah.
many ways it was. And how she just said, like, nope, we are here. This is our land. We have the right to defend it, and we're going to defend it. And by virtue of the justness of our cause, we will be we will find our way to the finish line. We will find our way to the just end that we're fighting for. Um, and I think she would have a similar message today, actually. But again, I'm not totally sure. But
Yeah.
her words are ringing in my head because they are playing on a constant loop in our museum. So come on in and check it out for yourself if you'd
She
like.
it sounds like she was very proud of who she was and where she came from. An unwavering pride.
Unwavering is a fantastic word. Absolutely. Yeah, and I would also associate that pridefulness
Yeah.
with that um, steadfastness for sure.
Well, Dan, I'm very grateful to you for walking us through what really is a remarkable life. I mean, to think of where it started and to think of how it ended is quite remarkable. So I appreciate your expertise and I wish you well.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me, Bob. It's been fun to walk down Golda Meir memory lane for sure.
You take care.
You too.